Hi, DLD family. Many of us are confused with test scores we've been hearing in our DLD Facebook community. So let's jump right in and learn what a lot of these numbers mean. Today, we're going to talk about percentile ranks, standard scores, and scaled scores. You're in for a fun time. We're going to do some math together. But before we start talking about the numbers, I wanted to just share that test scores are just one piece of information. They don't tell us how hard your child tried. They don't tell us how close your child was to the answer, what supports would have helped them succeed, or how they communicate in everyday life. And good clinical decisions always look at the whole child. So, first of all, what is standardized testing? That word standardized just means that the test that is given to your child is given in the exact same way to every child who takes the test. And when your child has an assessment, standardized tests are often an important part of that. So, when we're talking about standardization, we're talking about the exact same directions being given, the same wording, uh, limits on repetition. Can we repeat or not? That has to stay the same for every child. Rules about when helps or prompts or cues can be given, and there's also specific stopping points. And this allows us to fairly compare your child to all the other children of the same age who are taking that test. So you can think of it like everyone running the same race under the same rules. And because the rules are strict, testing sometimes doesn't capture your child at their very best or show their potential. During many test items, we can't rephrase the directions. We can't give extra scaffolding. We can't provide visuals or coach them the way that we would in therapy. And this is intentional for standardization, but it's also why we always interpret scores in context. And there's another really important piece of information before we jump into the math that you're all waiting for. And that is that in many school systems and service models, standardized scores are a major part of eligibility decisions for support. So the team often looks closely at those standard scores, percentile ranks, and cutoff ranges to help determine whether a child qualifies for services and or a diagnosis. However, like we've said, good teams don't rely on scores alone. They should also be considering functional impact, classroom performance, observations, and clinical judgment. And if you don't understand the scores that your child was given or the eligibility rules in your district, it's always appropriate to ask the team to help explain that to you. So, we're going to start with percentile ranks. A percentile rank tells us how your child performed compared to other children in the same age. And if we imagine 100 children lined up from lowest score to highest score, if your child's at the 50th percentile, they're right in the middle. That means 50% of kids would have scored lower than them, and 50% would have scored higher than them. If your child's at the 16th percentile, that's telling us that they performed the same as or better than 16 out of 100 children, but all the rest of the children in the group would have performed higher than them. And average doesn't just mean the 50th percentile. There's a wide band that's considered typical or average. Just like there's not one kid in the class that's average height, most of the kids in the class, though their height varies a little bit, most of them are average. And then there's a few outliers that are thought of as really tall or really short. So, in clinical contexts, this can vary a bit, but we often think of between the 16th and the 84th percentile. That's the average range. The 50th percentile is just the midpoint. Okay, so let's think of a girl named Gia. She scored at the 25th percentile on a vocabulary test. She's still within that broadly expected range, but she's on the lower end. So that means that she scored as well as 25 out of 100 kids, but 75 kids scored higher than she did, but she's still within the typical range. Now, standard scores, they often appear on overall language scores or index scores. And for them, most commonly, as you can see here on the chart, the average is set at 100. And most children fall between 85 and 115. 68% of kids, or you can see 34% are between 85 and 100, 34% again are between 100 and 115. So 68% of them fall within that band. And Yes, average range. So scores below 85 can show us that the child is having more difficulty than most kids. But again, the exact cutoff scores vary from test to test and from district to district. So average is a band, not a single number. Now let's give an example because this is a little bit confusing. If Gia received a standard score of 63 on a receptive language test, that tells us she had significant difficulty understanding language compared to same age peers on that specific measure. So we can see 63 for the standard scores, almost nobody else is in that range, right? Most kids are scoring a lot higher than her. But remember, that number alone doesn't tell the whole story. Now, scaled scores are another measure that are used. Scaled scores usually appear on individual subtests and help us see a child's pattern of strengths and needs. So, most commonly for scaled scores, the average is set at 10. Most children fall between 8 and 12. Some tests consider between 7 and 13 the average band. It varies a little bit, but 10 is the midpoint. And lower scores suggest more difficulty on that specific skill. And it's useful to look at this because we know lots of kids with DLD have uneven language profiles. So we can look at when we're looking at language, what parts of language are easier for them and what parts are harder for them. So let's say Gia earned a scaled score of 5 on a story retelling subtest. On many tests, that score reflects something very concrete, like how many story details or story parts she included when she was retelling the story. So the score is giving us useful information, and it's also showing her that most kids would have received a score between 8 and 12 or 7 and 13, but she was significantly lower than that. However, what the score often doesn't fully capture is maybe she remembered some key details or some smaller details, but she missed big important parts like the overall problem or the feelings. Or maybe she would have given way more information if the story had been repeated, or she would have benefited from extra processing time, or she would have told way more if she'd had a simple visual or story map. And all of this matters because we know that many children with DLD can show significantly stronger performance when they get to hear the story again, when they have time to practice, when they have a visual to help them organize their ideas, and so on. So we use the score to spot the area of need, and then we look closely at what supports help the child succeed. And one more point I wanted to make, different tests can use different scoring systems. So even when numbers look similar, they don't always convert perfectly across tests. And this is another one I love to tell parents, many test items, the scoring is very binary. So they're either correct or incorrect. They either get 0 or they get 1 point. And the final score doesn't always show how close your child was to getting 1 point, or whether just one more repetition would have helped them, what kind of cue might have unlocked the answer for your child, how much effort they were putting in. So as clinicians, we are watching all of that carefully, even when it doesn't fully appear in the score. So the functional piece matters most. Numbers alone can't tell us how your child is functioning in real life. And what matters just as much is how are they doing with following directions in the classroom? Can they tell you about their day? Can they participate with peers? Can they repair communication breakdowns? So a strong evaluation, yes, it will include standardized scores, but we also want qualitative observations, language samples, real world functioning, responses to scaffolding, support, what kinds of things are helping them. Because our goal shouldn't be just to generate a number. Our goal should be to understand how to help your child communicate most successfully in everyday life. So if your child's scores came back lower than you hoped, please remember these scores don't define your child, they don't measure their potential, they just help us understand where support may be helpful right now. And they're just one piece of the puzzle. With the right supports and explicit teaching, children with DLD absolutely can make meaningful progress. So if this video helped make testing feel a little bit easier to understand, feel free to share it, save it, and send the link to another parent that might need it. And if there's a question that I didn't answer, please feel free to comment and we can talk about it further. Thank you.